quickly I come undone, like melting ice on the sun. I stop when I'm falling free in the midnight daydream. Oh, you watch me and exposed, like lightning bolts in my bones. Why would I stop when I'm falling free in the midnight daydream? Midnight
Lights, please start presenting na. Thanks.
how quickly I come undone, like melting ice on the sun. Why would I stop when I'm falling free in the midnight daydream? Oh, you watch me and I'm exposed, like lightning bolts in my bones. Why would I stop when I'm falling free in the midnight daydream? friends are selling. They're only kids, but they're married now. Follow the lights, follow the crowd. Baby, we gotta get out. Let's get out of this town. I want an ocean view somewhere. As long as I'm next to you, don't care. I don't wanna live my life in circles. I just wanna find an road. Let's get away from here. Let's go. All of my friends are settling down. They're only kids, but they're married now. Let's follow the lights, follow the crowd. Baby, we gotta get out. Let's get out of this town. Let's go. Nothing ever changes here. I know. Another day, another year. Same old. I wanna live my life in circles. I just wanna find an empty road. Let's get away from here. Let's go. All of my friends are settling down. They're only kids, but they're married now. Let's follow the lights, follow the crowd. Baby, we gotta get out. Let's get out of this town. Let's get out of this town. Let's go. Let's go. Out of this town. Let's go. Let's get out of this town. Let's get out of this town. Let's get out of this town. Let's get out of this town.
Maybe together we can go somewhere. Any place is better. Starting from zero, got nothing to lose. Maybe we'll make me, myself, I got nothing to prove. You got a fast car. I got a plan to get us out of here. I've been working at a convenience store. Managed to save just a little bit of money. Won't have to drive too far. Just cross the border and into. You and I can both get jobs. Finally see what it means to be living. You got a fast car. Fast in the highway, we're gonna make a decision. Live tonight, die this way. So I remember we were driving your car. Things at first felt like I was drunk. See the lights say I'm the phone. Lights wrap around my shoulder and I got a feeling that I'm wrong. And I got a feeling that I just got a feeling that I could be someone. See, my old man's got a problem. Live for the battle, that's the way it is. Said his body's too old for work. His body's too young to look like his. Mama went off and left him. She wanted more from life than he could give. I said, he's got to take care of him. So I quit school, that's what I did. You got a fast car. We go cruising and set ourselves. You still ain't got a job. Not working the market as a checkout girl. And all things will get better. You'll find work and I'll get promoted. We'll move out of the shelter. Buy a bigger house and live in the suburbs. You got a fast car. See you fast enough so you can fly away. You gotta make a decision. Leave tonight or let me die this way. Driving in your car, speed so fast, felt like I was drunk. City lights stay out before, city all felt nice, wrap around my shoulder. And I let it lie long. I had a feeling that I could be so. Had a feeling that I could be so. Be so. Had a feeling that I could be someone. Took a pill and he to show I felt 10 years older, but it was something to do. I'm living out in LA. I drive a sports car just to prove I'm a baller, cause I made $1 million and I spend it on girls and shoes. But you don't be high like me, never really know why. Like you don't ever wanna step off that roller coaster and be all alone. You don't wanna risk, you don't wanna be stuck up on that stage, stuck up on that stage singing. Oh, I know a sad soul, sad soul. Oh, I know a sad soul, sad soul. I know a sad soul. I know a sad soul. I know a sad soul. I'm just a sinner who already blew his shot. Old timers, cause my name's a reminder of a pop song people forgot. And I can't keep a girl, no, cause as soon as the sun comes up, I cut them all loose and work's my excuse. But the truth is I can't open up. And you don't wanna be high like me, never really knowing why. I wanna step off that roller coaster and be all alone. And you don't wanna ride the bus like this, never know who to trust like this. Wanna be stuck up on that stage, stuck up on that stage. Oh, I know a sad soul, sad soul, darling. Oh, I know a sad soul, sad soul. I know a sad soul. I know a sad soul. Sad soul. I know a sad soul.
in my bones. This anticipation, see him through the smoke. So hard to be patient. Feelings are stuck with mine. We running out of time. Letting go so easily. I wanna feel him breathe. I want his hands on me. You know that's just one thing I need. 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 Just one thing I need. I need. I need. I need. Come on and be with the right time.
Good afternoon, everyone. So just a few reminders to all to always turn on your Zoom video later during the conference and always mute your Zoom audio during the conference proper unless otherwise recognized by the moderators to speak. And you may type your questions in the Zoom Q&A board and questions will be entertained during the open forum. Thank you, everyone. Again, just a few reminders, everyone. Good afternoon. We will start at 8:30, at 5:30 rather. And just a quick reminders for everyone that to always turn on your Zoom video during the conference. Always mute your Zoom audio during the conference proper unless otherwise recognized by the moderators to speak. And you may type your questions in the Zoom Q&A board. Questions will be entertained during the open forum. Thank you. All right, so I would like to request everyone to please settle down and be mindful of our house rules as we begin our program this afternoon. Again, I would like to request everyone to please settle down and be mindful of our house rules as we begin our program this afternoon. So our house rules, always turn on your Zoom video during the conference, mute your Zoom audio during the conference proper unless otherwise recognized by the moderators to speak, and you may type your questions on the Zoom Q&A board. Questions will be entertained during the open forum. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Mary Divine S. de Luna, a second year BS Foreign Service student.
And I am Divine Angelia Greda, third year foreign service student.
And we are
We are your moderators for this
afternoon. All right, so to begin with, let us bow our heads and put ourselves in the presence of the Lord, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God of grace and glory, as we approach these days of coming together virtually to this conference, favor us with your presence. Pour out your Holy Spirit to bless, to cleanse our hearts and minds, to open our spirits to the unseen possibilities before us. Guide each of our delegates to understand one another with humility, gentleness, and care. Make us passionate for your kingdom and your vision of what this world can be. Renew us as a church in our mission to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Amen. Also, let us give a moment of silence in respect to other religions.
Boa noite, povo, que eu cheguei. Mais outra vez, apresenta meu baianão. Eu vou cantar com muita alegria. Pra apresentar essas baianas da Maria. Povo que eu cheguei. Mais outra vez, apresenta meu baianão.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone, once again, and welcome to the Diplomatic League Conference Iloilo 2021. So before anything else, please allow me to read a part of the conference primer for us to understand our purpose here this afternoon. So this Diplomatic League Conference Iloilo 2021 is an online seminar and workshop about diplomacy in the Philippines and the United Nations. The organizing committee have selected 2 committees of the UN General Assembly to discuss thematic points and simulate at the end along with the UNJ plenary. The event was first planned by the officers of Junior Diplomats Corps of the University of San Agustin, Iloilo. It is organized in partnership with the Diplomatic League under the purview of the Philippine Embassy in New Zealand. The event is primarily formulated to target the students of Iloilo, but is also open for students from other universities globally. It will serve as an alternate event of the JDZ Iloilo for the supposedly 4th San Agustin Model United Nations. It will also be a good opportunity for the students to have a glimpse of how the UN functions, its structure, and how stakeholders of the UN discuss the issues on international affairs. This is not the usual event, but also a worthwhile application of theories and concepts that they have been studying. What sets it apart is the close partnership with the Philippine Embassy in New Zealand, Department of Foreign Affairs. With this engagement, the UN's rules of procedure and practices are the ones taught in the training and applied in the simulation. Deviation from the actual practices of the UN is avoided. In conclusion, the DLCI 2021 aims to impart knowledge and skills to these participants that this line of work in the future. All right, so our event this afternoon, we kickstart our 3-day seminar and workshop about diplomacy. So to formally begin our program, may I please call on the Junior Diplomats Corps Advisor, Ma'am Elaine and Nasen, for her welcome and opening remarks. Let us give her a big round of virtual applause, please.
His Excellency Dr. Jesus Domingo, Mr. Christian Cardenas, Attorney Jesil Cajes, Faculty of Foreign Service and Political Science Program, Ambassador Norman Garibay, Attorney Jordana Haco, Attorney Noel Cinco, our Academic Supervisor, Dr. Sonia Taquila, the Organizing Committee, Junior Diplomats Corps, with the Diplomatic League, Philippine Embassy in New Zealand, Department of Foreign Affairs, participants from various institutions, Lyceum of the Philippines, Columban College Incorporated, Cavite State University, St. Louis University, University of Baguio, Far Eastern University, Isabela State University, De La Salle, University of Cordilleras, Digos College, Miriam College, Liceo de Cagayan, University of Mindanao, Ateneo de University, Ateneo de Davao, University of Port Harcourt, Nigeria, and Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila and online SDG Youth Action Forum, and our own Foreign Service and Political Science students. Magandang araw, mabuhay, at maligayang araw ng katitingan. So I am going to make this remark as short as possible because I know that you are excited to listen to the talks and trainings lined up tonight. So I can still remember last academic year, the officers shared their vision of bringing the Diplomatic Week Conference here in Iloilo City. So who would have thought that despite the challenges that we are facing now, the organizers were able to pull it. So indeed, we are now in a globalized world. We are becoming more and more interdependent. We now transcend borders, and interaction and integration among people became easier. So this can also be applied to countries. And we need to remember that this poses both threats and opportunities. So this is true since this conference have brought together people all over the country and even overseas. So another example would be the pandemic that we are experiencing. As early as December 2019, states started to become vigilant, and we were able to exchange information on how the virus can be transmitted, contained, and mitigated. So this conference will provide a glimpse of how the Philippine Foreign Relations and the United Nations Organization. So UN is a key actor in providing venue for states to discuss issues arising from the globalized world. However, not all are aware of on how it works, how it maintains international peace and security. So that is the reason why we are here, because we are trying to make a change. So we try to be informed and we apply what we have learned in the four corners of our classroom, or now the four corners of our screens. We are grateful to the Diplomatic Week to continue and activities like this to empower the youth, to showcase their skills in diplomacy and in advancing the country's foreign policy. So as you embark your journey in this 3-day conference, I hope you will enjoy, learn new things, and able to create an impact to the society. Lastly, as we commemorate today the fallen soldiers of the Second World War, especially the 76,000 who marched more than 90 miles, may we remember that we can avoid the same thing from happening again by maintaining peace in this globalized world. So thank you to our guest speakers, participants, organizers. I welcome you all to the Diplomatic Week Conference Iloilo 2021. Thank you. I hope you will enjoy and bring back worldwide memories.
Thank you, Ma'am Elaine, for that opening remarks. At this portion, we're going to proceed to our first session, the introductory talks. At this part, we invited 3 honorable speakers to tackle and talk about 3 different topics. Our first speaker to tackle about the Philippines diplomacy and joining the DFA is presently the Philippine ambassador to New Zealand and accredited to the Cook Islands, Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. Joining the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Philippine Diplomatic Service in 1990, and has served in the Philippine missions to the United Nations in New York, USA, and Geneva, Switzerland, and to the Philippine Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He had also served as Department of Foreign Affairs Assistant Secretary for United Nations and international organizations from 2013 to 2016. He founded a diplomatic league at DFA in 2014, and he holds degrees from the Georgetown University of School of Foreign Service Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, University of the Philippines, NDCP, Philippine College of Criminology, and has studied at Harvard University. Everyone, let us all welcome His Excellency, Dr. Jesus Gary Domingo.
Okay, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay. Kia ora, maayong hapon. And I'm so glad to be with you for the Diplomatic League Conference Iloilo 2021. So together with our SecGen, Christian Cardenas, we launched the Diplomatic League way back in 2014 as a way to better engage students who are studying diplomacy, and even those who are not necessarily international relations or foreign service majors who are interested in possibly pursuing a career in the diplomatic service. But also, if it's also a platform on how you can already be practicing diplomacy as a student, as faculty, as a volunteer. Now, I realize we have 20 minutes, and I'm so glad that we're following New Zealand time, not Filipino time. We start on time. So just flag me in my last 5 minutes. But I know perhaps the most, the aspect of my talk, which you would probably be most interested in, is on joining the DFA. But of course, before I start, I guess I'd like to thank again the Junior Diplomatic Corps of the University of San Agustin. Thank you, Ms. Almarcen, for your opening remarks. And I'm glad to know that some colleagues are here, like Ambassador Norman Garibay, not only students also from Iloilo, but all over the country and all over the world. Okay, so we'll start a little backwards. So could you kindly flash the second to the last slide of my presentation? Okay. We can go back to the others on basic talk about diplomacy after I'll briefly talk about how to join the DFA. Okay, good. All right. So one up, please. All right. One more up. Joining the DFA. So basically, you have two tracks for pursuing a career in the Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, what I'm about to say, and I understand we have some colleagues, some friends here from Nigeria, from the United States, from New Zealand, all over the world. This pretty much also applies to pursuing a diplomatic career in your respective countries. Now, you have basically two choices. You can come in as a staff member or as an officer. The officer track is what leads you to reach the pinnacle of the diplomatic service, which is to become an ambassador. The staff track is the support track, and it's something like being enlisted in the armed services, in the armed forces. So the officer track, basically you start by taking the foreign service examination. Now, you will have an advantage, of course, if you are studying like the members of the Junior Diplomatic Corps, Foreign Service or International Relations, but it's not absolutely necessary. So one, to take the Foreign Service exam, your basic qualifications are, you have to have graduated with a bachelor's degree, but we don't have any restrictions on what degree it is. Now, the other details, you have to check the DFA website. Now, I understand you might need 2 or 3 years work experience or graduate school experience. Anyway, you just check the website. Now, the first phase, so after you submit your application, you will go through an interview and some kind of preliminary examination, which is very much like the civil service, a civil service examination. Anyway, you check the website. So you'll be checked on your writing ability, I think some math, that sort of thing. Pero suerte kami, we didn't have that in my time. When I took the exam in 1989 and I passed through the mercy of God in 1990, akala ko babaksak ko, but fortunately I passed. So anyway, now when you take the exam proper, it'll be 2 to 3 days written. And there are various items like English, Filipino, foreign language, what we call Philippine conditions, at least in my time, back in 1989, 90. Philippine conditions basically is Philippine history, Philippine current events, Philippine culture, world history, current events, international politics, international economics. Now, one thing that people always ask, do you have to be absolutely fluent in a foreign language? No. You have to have at least a good knowledge of a foreign language, not necessarily fluent. And okay, again, it may change, have changed over the years in my time, but I think this still applies. When they check your exam, the first thing they look at is the English. So the English will have you write, grammar, comprehension, that kind of thing. That is 15% of the exam, and that's the first thing DFA checks. If you don't pass that, they don't correct the rest of the exam. How about foreign language and Filipino? Those only count for 5% each. So with foreign language, well, we only offer certain languages, and that would include Russian, Arabic, Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, German. Did I mention Russian, French? Yeah, okay, anyway, you could check. Now, generally what we're looking at, okay, from what my impressions are, is that we're looking at least you had at least 2 good years of background in that language. When I took German, basically I was given a half-page paragraph, a news item, and I was asked questions in German about that news item. So, but with the more difficult languages, Chinese, also again, you're not expected to be fluent, but you have good basic reading and writing, reading comprehension and writing ability. But don't worry about it too much. When you get into the GFA, you'll have more chance to hone your foreign language. But Philippine conditions, you have to know about the country. But again, if you've been staying awake in class, in your high school, in your university career, you should be okay. Now, the important thing is it's to understand it's not really a board exam. So you're not expected to know the details about issuing passports, for example, but you have to have a good working knowledge of Philippine history, Philippine current events, world history and current events, and international politics and international economics. Now, so it is not important. It's not just important that you read, it's also important that you write. So I'll tell you, you have to be like, okay, in the part of the prep, you have to be a wide reader, and you have to have good writing and oral communication skills. So do you know who actually statistically, or from what I see, who do very well in exams are those people who have a journalistic background, who are with a school paper or already, writers for magazines, or law school students, because you're really trained to answer to the point. And remember, the FSO exam is not a board exam. So it's not something you can cram for. As I say, look at the coverage of the written exam. It's basically all your social science and basic knowledge about the world, about your country. And what we would like to see also, if you can represent the country, like we want to see in the back of our minds, can this person write a good press release? Can this person defend the policies of the government? Can this person defend the president before the UN? We want to see if you'll be able to defend the country and defend the policies of the government. So it's not like a law board exam, bar exam or nursing exam. It is, yes, you have basic stock knowledge, but it's more about your reasoning, writing ability. Now, after the written exam, if you pass the written exam, we have the oral exam, and that will consist of events like a panel interview. You'll be asked all sorts of questions. And what we're trying to see, can this person defend the country? Speaking before the UN, speaking to the media. We want to see if that person does not get rattled, okay? You have to have confidence. So, joining something like Toastmasters or very active in the debating activities is a great advantage. And then you'll have group activities to see if you can work with groups. Then we have the final event that culminates in a dinner, and that dinner we check your table manners, if you know how to converse. But the most fun part is the after dinner speech. I'm just wondering, in your course, are you simulating the after dinner speech? So what happens in the after dinner speech is you go one by one, you make bunot, you pick a topic from a bowl. It's written in piece of paper. You pick it up, you read it, you get 30 seconds to compose your thoughts, and you speak. In my time, my examination question was, you're given a scenario. You are the Philippine, this was this was 1989. You are the Philippine delegate to the ASEAN conference on the status of Cambodia. Yeah, something like that. And another, one of my batchmates, he sadly passed away, the great ambassador Doilo scenario. His scenario was, you are being awarded the Order of the Yellow Elephant of Thailand, I think it was, but Order of the Yellow Elephant, and give a acceptance speech. Another scenario could be, you're speaking to OFWs in Seoul, Korea, on the occasion of Philippine Independence Day, or it could have been Araw ng Kagitingan, national, of today. So then, when you pass with all that, boom, you become a Foreign Service officer. You will go through basic training. You will go through a cadetship, and after about 3 years, you'll get your first foreign assignment. Okay. So again, be a wide reader, hone your written and oral communication skills. Now, if you want to join as a staff member, which is also fine, but again, it's not the track that leads you to become a consul and later ambassador, but support staff. Basically, it's you get you earn civil service eligibility, this civil service professional. I don't know if the sub-prof still allows you to get in, but at least the prof will certainly do that. Then again, if you're in the officer track, you after you have to spend 2 to 3 years in Manila before you get a foreign assignment. When you're in foreign assignment, it's 6 years, then you come home for 2 to 3 years, then you're out again, you cycle. With the staff, it's similar, but you have to wait longer to get foreign assignment. Okay, now be happy to answer questions later, but now let's go to my presentation on Philippine diplomacy. Let's go back to the beginning of the presentation. Divine, how many minutes do I have left? Divine, how many minutes do I have?
Yes, Ambassador, for a while.
Or
22 minutes, Ambassador.
sorry, how many?
22 minutes, Ambassador.
20. Okay, just flag me when I'm in my last 5 minutes. Okay, so before we talk about, well, I think a lot of this will be quite familiar to all of you, so pasensya lang po if it's repetitive. So before we talk about diplomacy, we have to talk about foreign policy. Next slide, please. So what is foreign policy? Basically, it's our plans and programs of how we deal with the rest of the world. And it has a constitutional basis. So yeah, we renounce war of an instrument national policy. And then we have to accept the general principles of international law, and we adhere to a policy of peace, equality, and justice. Then we pursue an independent foreign policy, and the constitutional provisions that basically, important point, we pursue an independent foreign policy. We chart our own course. Next, please. So what are the key elements of what we call our foreign policy pillars? Now, this makes it more specific. So we have 3 pillars: preservation, enhancement of national security, promotion of the rights and welfare of overseas Filipinos, and the promotion and attainment of economic security. Next, please. Now, our thrusts are basically the pillars, but we add one more: cultural diplomacy. So national security, economic security, overseas Filipino protection, and cultural diplomacy. Next, please. So what does independent Philippine foreign policy mean? Simply, it means we are friend to all and an enemy to none, and we determine our policy by ourselves and not being forced or coerced by a foreign government, and that Filipino, not foreign interests, are paramount. Next, please. So we also have these, what we call the 9 realities of foreign policy. So this has been around since really the the 80s, the 90s. And so these are meaning that how we look at the world. Some of these might need some updating, and maybe this can be a good exercise later. So a lot of these were really formulated already in the 90s. So, okay, one, the dynamics of China, Japan, and the US will determine our security and economic evolution in Southeast Asia. Yeah, apologies. ASEAN is becoming more and more important. Europe will be playing a more significant global role. The international Islamic community is critical to our search for lasting peace in Mindanao, but it's a good thing we have the BARM, and we've made great strides in Muslim Mindanao. Next, please. Next slide. Now, other inter-regional organizations will be more and more important, like, for example, APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, African Union, and so on. And protection of environment, natural resources, and maritime territory is key. And I guess we can update that by the importance of climate change. And if you want to put this as a reality, but maybe a separate one, crises, non-traditional security issues such as the ongoing pandemic. Now, economic diplomacy is also important. We need to expand our foreign markets and get more FDI. International tourism is an important driver of growth, but not much because we're locked down in COVID. And overseas Filipinos will play a critical role, and they are playing a critical role in our economic and social stability. After all, the Bagong Bayani. Okay, next, please. So, yes, so we have to put now a new reality: crisis diplomacy. So overseas conflicts, terrorism, natural and man-made disasters, climate change, and pandemics are things that our diplomatic service have to really work on. In fact, we are preoccupied now with managing the pandemic in terms of making sure our kababayan overseas are protected, and we are bringing them home. Next, please. So who do we say is the chief architect of our foreign policy, our chief diplomat? It's the president. So the secretary, well, okay, we can say, sometimes you say the secretary of foreign affairs is our chief diplomat, but the chief architect of our foreign policy is the president. So this SFA, or secretary of foreign affairs, is the cabinet member in charge of foreign policy. His or her, as the case may be, agency is the DFA. And what we call the foreign service is all the diplomatic missions and personnel of the Philippines overseas. So all the embassies, the consulates, and personnel overseas. So I am part of the foreign service. Next, please. So diplomacy proper. Next, please. So we can say, parang katawan, that diplomacy, not prostitution, is the world's oldest profession. Why? Again, just a bit of on the lighter but biblical mood, that if diplomacy is about negotiations and treaties, what was the first treaty between God and man? The Treaty of Eden. Don't eat the apple. So if a diplomacy involves negotiation, persuasion, who was the first diplomat? Satan, in the form of the snake, who negotiated with Eve to break the treaty. Yeah, okay. Now, we find ourselves now, like continuing the Bible analogy, in the state of the Tower of Babel, where man in his vanity is trying to master the universe, reach heaven with his own technology, and we're divided into different tongues and tribes. All right, next, please. But otherwise, they say diplomacy, the ability to tell somebody to go to hell, but have them look forward to it. But seriously, it's about relationships between countries and peoples. It's being messengers. So I am like President Duterte's messenger to New Zealand, to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Archangel Gabriel is considered to be the archangel, the patron saint of diplomacy, because remember, he played the role of messenger. And his symbol is the fleur de lis, the lily flower. But otherwise, we can say that diplomacy also consists of tracks. Track 1, public diplomacy. That's the one you normally hear about, government diplomacy. Track 2 is private diplomacy, NGOs, businesses, academe. And track 3, persons, people, grassroots. Next, please. So what is a diplomat? It's a bridge. He or she is a bridge between countries, advocates causes like gender equality, protection against pandemics, counterterrorism, anti-terrorism, interfaith dialogue, and a mover of commerce, a mover of development. Next, please. So otherwise, you can say, like when I was teaching foreign service way back before your grandparents were born. In the early 90s, I first started teaching in Miriam and Lyceum, and well, to use the S&M like Schumarch. Well, we don't call it Schumarch, SM. So the role, practical role, you're like a soldier. You're defending the country. You're like a spy. You're really looking at opportunities in other countries. Sundo. We play a lot of sundo. Yung mga VIP na gustong bumiyahe, bumisita sa mga bansa namin, hatid sundo sa airport. Okay, but you know, that's fine, protocol. Mother, you are the mother. More than the father, you are the mother of the overseas Filipinos in your jurisdiction. You're the one they go to for care and guidance. There's also the role of the messenger. You are the channel of communications, and you are a merchant. You are doing business for the Philippines in the country. Next, please. So SM. So let's review again. Some people say diplomacy is the ability to tell somebody to go to hell, but have them look forward to it. Or some say it's honest people sent overseas to lie for the country. Being able to step on someone's toes without spoiling the shine of their shoes. It's about seduction, smooth talking, pacifying, being tactful, polite, friendly. But ultimately, we are the front line of the country. We are the front line of national security. Next, please. So yeah, other terms of diplomacy, I won't get into that, but keep the power. But I like this one. Oh, sorry, go back. The art of saying nice doggy, until you can find a rock. Meaning, if we have to go into conflict with another country, you buy time for our armed forces. Okay. No, but again, we try to avoid and prevent conflict. Next, please. So now, what is the relationship of international relations and foreign policy? Well, international relations is the study of relations among countries, nation states, international organizations. You study the political, economic, cultural dimensions. Foreign policy are the plans and programs of a nation state for the conduct of its international relations, and diplomacy is implementing that foreign policy. Next, please. So types of diplomacy, there's the bilateral. So like the normal, so-called normal, one-on-one, like Philippines, New Zealand, US and China, or regional when you deal with a group like ASEAN. Now, your exercise with Model UN is about the multilateral, dealing with the international system, all countries as a whole in the UN system. Next, please. So again, track 1, track 2, track 3, government, non-government, and private. But then sometimes you have something in the middle, track 1.5, when you have, say, for example, universities that discuss the West Philippine Sea issue. That's example of 1.5. Next, please. Okay, so there's, yes, diplomacy can be political, it can be economic, it can be cultural, it can be consular. Okay, so what is the main preoccupation of DFA of those 4? Okay, Debs, you're also divine, right? Okay, so we get control. So anyway, most of our is consular, helping the needs of our OFWs, passport issuance, and then when people want to visit, visas, documents, and other, and then part of consular assistance to nationals, helping Filipinos in trouble, and helping them get home, helping them cope with COVID-19 is our preoccupation now. Next, please. So what are the types of DFA offices we have overseas? We have embassies, which are offices in capital cities, like I have in Wellington. Now, if it's not in the capital city, it's called a consulate. Missions are like our embassies, but where international organizations are, like our mission to the UN, where I was in Geneva and New York, our mission to ASEAN in Jakarta, for example. Now, honorary consulates are basically volunteer consulates run by Filipinos or foreigners who are helpful to the Philippines. They run them voluntarily overseas to help us out. Like, for example, in Auckland, the other city of New Zealand, and Christchurch, we have honorary consulates. Next, please. Now, again, as I said, we have these different tracks. We have the officer track, FSO, which puts you on track to start as vice consul all the way to ambassador. Now we have what we call the staff officers and staff employees, also very valued. They're similar to like the privates, corporals, and sergeants in the in the military and police. Service attaches are people we have joining us in embassies and consulates from other agencies. Now, normally, if you take the exam and this is your career, you're considered a career ambassador or career diplomat. Now, political ambassadors are people who are not from the career, who are appointed by the president to serve as ambassadors to certain countries. Next, please. So we know about immunities and privileges. That means basically you are exempt from criminal jurisdiction and taxation of your host country, but don't abuse it. Okay. Diplomatic corps. So we are not the diplomatic corps. The diplomatic corps is a term which means the foreign ambassadors, for example, in Manila. It doesn't refer to the diplomats of your own country. It's the foreigners in your capital city. And the typical activity is a diplomatic reception, holding a formal event to celebrate their national day, like, say, for us, June 12th. Next, please. So, yes, why are we called His or Her Excellency? Because we are representing the president or the head of state. So we're offered a parang pantay kami in terms of protocol overseas. So the full title is Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, meaning that you are really representing your head of state, your country. Chancery is the business office of the embassy. The residence is the home of the ambassador. Presentation of credentials is the ceremony where when you start, you show your letter to the head of state that you are legit, you're going to start your work. Order of precedence is in the diplomatic corps. If you are the most seniority, this is a list depending on when you presented your credentials. So in some countries, it's the representative of the Vatican who is the head of the diplomatic corps, but in other countries, it's the dean is determined who's the most senior. Right now, I'm out of 50, I'm the third most senior. Next, please. So treaties, agreements between countries requiring ratification by your legislature and head of state. Executive agreements are like treaties, but you don't need ratification. Memorandum of understanding, more basic agreements, which, different formats of agreements between countries. Note verbal is a formal way of we communicate between the embassy and our host government or vice versa. Aide memoire is a fancy way of saying your minutes of a meeting that you have to both agree on when you discuss with a foreign entity. Next, please. So yeah, all sorts of diplomatic immunity privileges. I won't go into that because you should not abuse them. Next, please. Consular concepts. Again, the key thing is your passport. It's a booklet proving you're a citizen of country. It's not your personal property. So the government can defend that anytime. And so, okay, visa, it's a stamp or sticker, which gives you permission to go another country, put in your passport. Honorary consuls, again, volunteers who run our honorary consulates who have, and if you're on the consular side, you have limited immunities and privileges. Next, please. So again, how does defense and diplomacy that we have a one country team, which ideally in bigger embassies, you have defense attaches or police attaches. Again, you can just review this on your own. Next, please. So the DFA proper, how are we organized? Next, please. So our big boss is the SFA. Then we have his other immediate deputies. We have undersecretaries for administration, bilateral relations, ASEAN affairs, civil and security, consular, migrant workers affairs, dealing with OFWs, multilateral affairs, and international economic relations. So UN matters are under this undersecretary, and strategic communications and research. Next, please. So the workhorse is our geographic offices and specific policy offices. For example, I used to head UN and international organizations. Next, please. Then we have other various offices covering migrant workers, consular, et cetera, et cetera. Next, please. So we have a total of 62 embassies, 24 consulates general, and 4 permanent missions all over the world. Next, please. So what do we do when we're overseas? We promote political, economic, cultural relations with our host country. We protect the rights and welfare of OFWs. We help distressed OFWs. We support Filipino communities. We promote Filipino products, services, tourism, investment. We present a positive image of the country. Again, we take care of consular services like passports. That also includes, we also do things like we take reports of birth, and marriage and death. Sometimes some posts, we can actually officiate marriages. We conduct overseas absentee voting, and a little gruesome that when you die, we help ship your remains back to the Philippines. Next, please. So we have a one country team approach where in many posts we have also colleagues coming from different agencies like DND, DILG, DTI, DOLE, Tourism, Agriculture, DSWD, NICA, and the Coast Guard. Next, please. So this is how, sorry. I think I tried to convert this from one format to the other, but here's a basic chart. The boss is the ambassador, the captain ball, there's a deputy, and we have different sections of the embassy: consular, administrative, political, defense, labor, cultural, finance, and so on. Next, please. So now what's confusing is our ranking and positioning system. So ambassador is a title, but it's okay. How it works is what personal rank you have is foreign service staff employee, staff officer. Now, when you look at the left column, when you become a new officer, you're FSO 4, class 4, 3, 2, 1, then career minister, then you get the highest rank is chief of mission. Now, these are your basic ranks. Titles like consul and ambassador, you get that when you're overseas, if you're in an embassy or a consulate. So for example, to be ambassador, you have to be at least chief of mission 1 or 2. To be a basic vice consul, you have to be at least an FSO 4 and so on. So we don't use these diplomatic and consular titles when we're back home in Manila, only when we're overseas. Next, please. So what's diplomatic life like? Okay. This is the Chancery. This is our working office in Wellington, New Zealand. It's so you notice the round doors, like Lord of the Rings, diba? Next, please. Then this is our residence. It's nice as palang Downton Abbey. Come and visit when you can. Okay, next, please. Actually, that's where I am now. Now, this is my ceremony for the presentation of credentials. So notice the Katatubo are the Maori people, and actually Attorney Jesil will talk about more of the Katatubo in her talk about the indigenous people of New Zealand and their legal framework. So at first there's like that warrior test. They drop an arrow, and if I pick it up, I come in peace. Then we do a nose to nose, which is a greeting called a hongi. Bottom left is the more traditional review of troops, and then bottom right, I'm with the head of state, the former Governor General. Next, please. Okay, so DFA in action. Well, this is not from the left is like scenes from operations in Baghdad, Iraq, some OFWs, then flown to safety back in DFA. Bottom on the right is we also do, for example, we do cultural thing. We promote Philippine language and culture. And here we are teaching Filipino language and culture in an elementary school in New Zealand. Next, please. So yeah, these are operations in time of pandemic, and part of your job is appearing on the news. I have 2 minutes left. We're almost done. Next, please. So now a concept we've developed is universal diplomacy, where everyone is a potential diplomat. And this is the core concept behind the Diplomatic League. Be the best person you can be. Be like a son to all. And already you can start being a diplomat even if you're not in the DFA. How? You advocate causes, you advocate your community, you push commerce. You begin with yourself. Then you help your family, your angkan, and your school. And we're counting on the Junior Diplomatic Corps to be a partner of the Diplomatic League. And what is our vision? The 5 Ps, a planet of peaceful, prosperous, and purposeful people. Now, how do you become a son? Very simple. Have you heard of the concept of ikigai? That means finding your meaning and purpose in life, a Japanese term. So first, it's becoming a son is a very simple 8-point process. And the first 4 is the ikigai, the red part. Do what you're good at, do what you like to do what you can be paid for, and do what the world needs. And through the D League, we'll help you develop those 4 points. Now, the other 4 points is your perspective on the world. What is important? You have to balance these 4, and none of these 4 should be disproportionate, and you should not ignore any one of these 4. First is your freedom, your personal freedoms, your rights. Then is your family. Family is important. Then fairness, but fairness for all society. And then your faith. It can be religion, but even for those people who are not religious, they have a philosophy. They are humanists. They have an outlook on life. So balance those fours. Okay, so 8-point formula to become a son. Now, last slide is all about the Diplomatic League. So we're very happy. You are continuing the tradition. You are our first major activity for 2021. COVID, the silver lining of COVID is that finally we're able to launch the D-League in Iloilo. Some of you from, especially the USA graduates, I think I recognize some of you, like si Paulo, were with us in our Diplomatic League events back in our last live events back in 2019. But some were able to join us last year with our Diplomatic League conference in Baguio, and we had other activities through Zoom. So the D-League, what is the D-League? It is the DFAs. Now, it's actually all of DFA, but I am still continuing to run it, even though I'm here in New Zealand. It is a DFA's youth, young professional, and volunteer engagement platform. So we do conferences, training, networking, and mentoring. And then we're offering the chance for you to be a recognized VAMBA. The questions, we could give you more information how to become a recognized volunteer ambassador, and you join with your school, with your organization, or as individuals. Next, please. So we went over this already. Next, please. Maraming salamat po. So that's my email if you want to contact me. Thank you very much. Sorry, went a little overtime, but looking forward to the rest of the conference, and congratulations, USA, for putting together the first D-League conference from Iloilo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Ambassador Domingo, for the wonderful, enlightening talk you shared to all of us. This is an eye-opening to all of the aspiring diplomats here present today in this conference. Indeed, being a diplomat is not all glitz and glamour, but hard work, passion, and public service for our country and to all Filipinos around the world. Let's give him a big round of applause, please. We will move on to our next speaker, that will be talking about the disarmament and international security, specifically developing international legal framework for the control of small arms and light weapons. He works for the Philippine government as a senior trade officer of the Department of Trade and Industry, Strategic Trade Management Office. Under his portfolio is an overall mandate to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, or WMD. To this end, he handles items inter alia, Arms Trade Treaty, United Nations 1540 Committee, conventional weapons, small arms and light weapons, and other multilateral mechanisms on WMD as assigned. He is also part of the Sanctions Response Group of the STMO and the lead officer developing framework on Philippine controls of military goods. Prior to DTI, he handled several projects on UN Sustainable Development Goals business sector engagement under Global CEO Alliance, and concurrently handled substantive, administrative, and consular work of the Consulate of Samoa and the Philippines as GCEOA chairman was appointed. Academically, he graduated with leadership and academic merits, cum laude at Lyceum of the Philippines University, LPU Manila, with a degree in foreign service, major in international trade, most outstanding student leader of his batch, and only student in LPU history awarded 3 times the university-wide academic award, 5S Student Quality Circle. He is finishing his master's degree in foreign service under Ambassador Rosario Manalo at the Philippine Women's University. He is also a trained intelligence officer with the guidance of NICA, NBI, and the Interpol. He also had advanced trainings on WMD non-proliferation and export control from United States, State Department, NNSA, Japan METI, German BAFA, EU Export Control Program, and others. He is also a proud Provinciano and Ilocano. He was born and raised from the North, but serving a global purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Christian Mark Cardenas.
Alright, hello, good afternoon. Hi, evening na pala, it's 6:22. But I've heard meron tayong attendees from other countries. We have some from Nigeria, New Zealand, and even from New Jersey, as mentioned by Ambassador Gary kanina. No? So welcome everyone dun sa in our conference here at the Diplomatic League. Before I start, siguro let me acknowledge the presence of our distinguished guests this evening. So from the faculty of University of San Agustin, si Attorney Jordana Jaco. Good evening, ma'am. Ambassador Norman Garibay, Attorney Noel Cinco, Dr. Sonia Dakila, and their distinguished advisor, also the distinguished advisor of Junior Diplomats Corps, Ms. Elaine Rose M. Nasen. My fellow speakers, His Excellency Ambassador Gary, and Attorney Jesil Cajes. So good evening, everyone, and to the rest of the attendees, no? Good evening. Now, I've been tasked to give a discussion in preparation of your coming training and simulation this coming 2 days. So I believe this is the first conference of the Diplomatic League, and the first actually simulation, the first simulation that will be held virtually in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is the first and very historic and even held ng April 9, no? Araw ng Kagitingan. So congratulations first of all to everyone for making it in this conference. My specific topic for this evening would be small arms and light weapons. So this topic was chosen because you would be simulating one of the committees of the UN, the first committee. So and the first committee covers this particular thematic item, small arms and light weapons, among others. So before moving forward to the regulation and all, let's try to give a clear picture of small arms and light weapons. So could you present the next slide, please? Ayun, all right. So in actuality, there's no universally accepted definition of small arms or light weapons. So there's no internationally accepted definition for that. The Small Arms Survey largely adopts the proposal put forward by the UN panel of governmental experts. In every topic or every item that they have, usually they create a committee or a set of experts to handle. Now the UN panel of governmental experts considers portability a defining characteristics for SAL-W. I'll refer further on small arms and light weapons SAL-W from now on, okay? Even in our upcoming simulation. So, yun, portability is the main definition for SAL-W. And the panel's list include both civilian and military weapons. All right, so we would have to be very careful also, no? Later in how we categorize these things, because there are different regulations being in place for civilian and military handling of these weapons. So that fire projectile with the condition that the unit or system may be carried by an individual, a small number of people, or transported by a pack animal or light vehicle. So it's very mobile and very portable. Small arms, just in this does not include everything. So includes revolvers, inter alia revolvers, self-loading pistols, rifles, carbines, assault rifles, submachine guns, light machine guns. Light weapons naman include heavy machine guns. So I believe small light machine guns are those na mayroong size ng 12 mm and below. 12 mm and below ammunition, and 12 mm and above would be heavy machine guns already. Handheld under barrel and mounted grenade launchers, portable anti-aircraft guns, portable anti-tank guns, recoilless rifles, portable launchers or anti-tank missile, and rocket systems. The system is very different. I'll be giving you also in the simulation part na some reference to these items. Portable launchers of anti-aircraft missile systems and mortars calibers of less than 100 mm. So very technical, if I may say. Next slide, please. Okay, now what I would like you to remember in this talk primarily is that regulating of SAL-W, including other weapon systems, no, even the autonomous weapons that's being developed currently, you have to regulate it in its whole cycle, life cycle. That's what they're calling it, from manufacture to the use, transfer to the disposal or the activation. Okay, so manufacture includes actual manufacture, marking systems, then the use, possession, use, transfer, and storage of these weapons. Disposal includes destruction, but in some cases, the activation and reactivation. Okay, sorry, excuse me. So this is the life cycle, technically, of a weapon. All right, and that would have to be regulated all throughout for maximum protection, security, safety, and safeguards. I'll be discussing that also. Next slide, please. Now, in doing these regulations, we have to understand that there are different efforts from different levels. No? Efforts from the government nationally, efforts from the regional groups that we have, and efforts from the global arena also. The first level in there that I've indicated is national. No? So there should be a national instrument that regulates these weapons. Primarily because sovereignty is the highest highest decision even at the international field right now, regardless if we have the UN or not, because the sovereign state can make decisions on its own. It can enforce with sovereign powers within its territory, within its jurisdiction, whereas the global can only enforce unless the national authority would be subduing or surrendering a part of their sovereignty to that international entity. So, so national legislation is very important in order to make enforcement, in order to make implementation of these regulations. Regional also is a support, so regional instrument to recommend and regulate. Global, there has been a lot of references from national legislation. From global legislations to create national legislation. For example, sa Philippines, we have, as mentioned earlier, the 1540 Committee. It's a resolution adopted by the UN Security Council, which prevents the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And the Philippines, by virtue of law transformation to our national legislation, also adopted RA 10697, which is the Strategic Trade Management Act, which regulates the regulates the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction by creating a mechanism for it to be regulated. All right, so there should be 3 levels of regulation. Kumbaga, that's what I've been saying, and these 3 levels of regulation should cover several items. So next slide, please. Okay, this items, I would call it SSS of regulation, no? In terms of military. So security, safety, and safeguards. When we say, I'll go first to the safeguards. So if I say safeguards, it refers to international instruments. So ito yung definition, technical definition, the international arena. No? It refers to the international instruments in place that would be used to to regulate a certain item or to regulate a certain system. So in terms of SALW, there should be an international regulation, and we call that safeguards. Some examples of this international regulations would be firearms protocol, which I would recommend you read through, para you'll have a more productive discussion during the simulation. The firearms protocol, the arms trade treaty. So those are just examples of those safeguards that are in place. The safety refers to how those weapons or items will be handled. No? So in terms of handling, how should those items be? How should those items be carried? Baga, how those items would be stored properly. Because there are several risks in place in handling such weapons. There should be regulation to mitigate the risks of handling those weapons also. So we call that safety. Personal protective equipments also, PPE, for those handling those weapons. Very prevalent yung safety in the field of chemicals, chemical weapons and all. But also on SALW, there should be safety in place in how to handle. Sabi nga nila, in handling weapons or in handling SALW, always treat it loaded. Always treat the gun loaded. Rule number 1. Then we have security. So security refers to those to the mechanism in place for it to be regulated in terms of transfer. So a weapon should not be easily transferred to anyone, no? Because it's very risky to have weapons easily being bought anywhere. There are several risk criteria that you would have to consider in order for you to give out licenses, give out permission for someone to handle weapons. There's a different regulation for military and military transfers. Several conditions also, or risk assessment criteria for transfer to civilians. So those are several considerations. Weapons, the SSS of regulation. All right, clear? Next slide, please. So as I've mentioned earlier, ito yung some of the international instruments in place. So protocol against the illicit manufacturing of and trafficking of in firearms, their parts and components and ammunition, which is the firearms protocol. The United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime, Arms Trade Treaty, a lot more. Actually, I would just chat it in our chat box para makita nyo. I would refer from a paper that I've made for our office na lang. But I cannot share the document. That's why i-chat ko na lang sa chat box natin. All right. Next slide, please. Okay, activities related to the regulation of SALW. As I've mentioned earlier, manufacture. So manufacture, when we talk about manufacturing, this can either be at the hands of the state or semi-private companies, or even private companies. So in the Philippines, there are weapons manufacturers, but SALW, I believe, we are importing weapons. No, one of the most prevalent siguro that I've heard of would be Arms Corps. For the Philippine military, we're importing weapons from other countries. And these entities should be subjected to state authorization or license. So before someone, an entity or an individual, natural or juridical person, would be able to handle weapons or be able to acquire weapons, they should be licensed or authorized by the state. That's why you cannot carry firearms freely, because you would have to apply for a license or an authorization for you to carry such firearms. Even the use is another subject. Then we go to marking of weapons. It's just making sure that these weapons are traceable. So this refers to traceability. No? So traceability helps in investigation in case there's already an incursion or there's already a violation that's been committed. So the markings of such weapons would be very helpful for an investigation on the enforcement of the regulations. Now, we have to understand that marking comes on different life stages of the weapon. So manufacturing stage, they have the manufacturing mark, and the import mark, and the import mark also whenever this is transferred to another jurisdiction. So those would have to be marked properly in order for the weapon to be easily recognizable or traceable. That's very complicated. Some of these markings are being deleted, no? In order based unscrupulous personalities or individuals for their use on activities like diversion. But as much as possible, we would have to put markings in order for these weapons to be traceable. If not traceable anymore, that's another problem for enforcement. Record keeping is a third one to be considered. So whenever this is mostly enforced rather to the companies or to those that are importing. So there should be a record keeping mechanism. Maintain a comprehensive information about the production process and the transfer process of those weapons. So the Philippines requires at least 10 years of record keeping. At least 10 years of record keeping in the life cycle of the life cycle of weapons, no. So kailangan we know when and where it was manufactured, at least by the required span of years by our regulation. So 10 years yung require natin. And also that's the standard, I believe, of the international instruments, 10 years. But there has been a discussion of extending that record keeping requirement at the firearms protocol, or rather under the working group of firearms. Under the working group of firearms. No. Next slide, please. Then we have possession and ownership of firearms. So access to firearms and ammunition. So they are sold separately. Then in doing this, we should, as I mentioned earlier, apply risk analysis, apply the risk assessment criteria for the regulators to determine whether they would permit, authorize, or give you a license to carry or use these firearms. Transfers refer to import, export, transit, transshipment, and brokering activities. These items, I would give a definition from RA 10697 na lang later on the following slides for you to be able to understand what are this specifically, no? So, but before going to the next slide, enforcement refers to administrative or criminal in nature. So there are different levels of violations also. You would have to consider how grave that is to be able to consider it a criminal violation, for it to be considered an administrative violation. Next slide. Okay, so this is from RA 10697, the Strategic Trade Management Act, because it defined a lot already. So import refers to the shipment of strategic goods. Strategic goods refer to items that are that may be used for military and civilian purposes. It's being regulated because it's very difficult to regulate items that might be used for civilian, because that's an excuse already. So what if they say they would just use this for medical purposes, no? Whereas yun pala, it would be used for weapons manufacture. That's why strategic goods regulations very tricky. Commodity classifications very tricky. These items have several technical specifications for it to be considered strategic. And those specifications would also have to be checked relative to the risk assessment. No? Ayun. And these strategic goods also may be used to develop or manufacture weapons kasi, like navigation systems. The navigation systems may be used for aircrafts, but also may be used for missiles, especially autonomous missiles. Yeah. Or technology by any means from a foreign country into the Philippines. Export refers to an actual shipment of strategic goods out of the Philippines. Okay, yun lang yan. Medyo mahaba yan. But that's the whole definition indicated in the law. Next slide. Transit refers to shipment of strategic goods within the Philippines and those entering and passing through the territory of the Philippines, with an ultimate destination outside the Philippines in such a manner that the strategic goods remain at all times or on the same carrier. Okay, I would advise that you be careful in these two definitions. The transshipment refers to a mode of shipping or good on a carrier which enters the territory of the Philippines, wherein the good is unloaded. Okay, so it should be unloaded for it to be considered transshipment. If transit, it would not be unloaded from the carrier. Just passing through, okay, the territorial waters of the Philippines. Next slide. Related services, brokering has been mentioned earlier, but actually the Philippines is very pabida and we regulate a lot. So apart from brokering, we regulate financing. Financing because for you to be able to proliferate weapons of mass destruction, and also these firearms and all, SAW, you would need finances. No? The finances is very tricky because that's being used by unscrupulous individuals, especially with the development of IT. Actually, no, for just an information, one of the most developed diversion capability of North Korea, the PRK, is their ability to hack. So they have a very extensive system of hacking. That's a challenge now for international instruments to be able to regulate. And apart from finances that are being hacked, it's also very tricky to handle transfers of software. No, because for these weapon systems to operate, for this emerging weapon systems, you need to have specific softwares, and those softwares are also being proliferated, are also being diverted to other countries. Pakistan developed their weapons or nuclear system from UK, I believe, and France. So the software that's being used are, alimutan ko lang who that specific person is, but he's very famous, no? And it's a system that's still in place right now. Yung ginawa niyang parang full of proliferation system. It's very prevalent. But they're transporting IT and software also. For that, some companies are being required to have TCP, technology control plan, wherein they would have to make sure that their technology or risk assessment process in place or control plan in place is able enough to prevent the proliferation or diversion of their items. So the software being used to operate an AK would not be transferred to Iran, for example. Next slide, please. So, okay. After all I've said, I would like you to go back or circle back to the SSS regulation covering the life cycle now. So from manufacturer, use, disposal, and disposal, we would have to consider the safety, safeguards, and security aspect of these regulations. So pagtamain lang natin, we have to make sure all of these items are accounted in doing regulation. And I would appreciate if the simulation would be able to discuss all of this security, safety, and safeguards of cell-W from its manufacture, use to disposal. All right. Next slide. Ayan. And that's the end of my presentation. I believe I made it in 20 minutes span. If you have any questions, we would be glad to answer it later at the open forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Cardenas. And one thing that we can pick up in this discussion is that small weapons and firearms should be regulated properly as they can pose great risk or threat. Regulation and education on these things to make everyone aware of this impact. And let's move on to our last speaker for today. She will be discussing about social, humanitarian, and culture, specifically preservation and protection of IP in the Philippines. She is a New Zealand trained lawyer based in Wellington. She works as a barrister and a solicitor at Woodward Law, specializing treaty law and general civil litigation. Prior to becoming a lawyer, she was trained primarily in early childhood education teacher and was a school principal in Gisborne, New Zealand. Outside of work, she is a radio presenter / DJ at the Culture Convention Show with Hot City FM 106.7, featuring music, community news, and issues from the local Filipino community and other ethnic groups in Wellington. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Atty. Jesil Cajes. Let us give her a big round of applause.
Maayong gabi kaniyong tanan, magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Good evening, Tina Koto Katua Ngami Hinoy. That's Tereo greetings from the indigenous people here in New Zealand who are the Maori people. Again, I'm working as a lawyer here in New Zealand, and I'm originally from Bohol. And warmest greetings to all our organizers, our special guests tonight. And of course, to all our attendees, I can see you're all very young and energetic and smart, good-looking people. Hello, kia ora. Thank you so much, guys, for coming along tonight. My specialist areas of law are public law, environmental, health, and land law. But we also specialize the Treaty of Waitangi, or the Titiriti of Waitangi, which is the treaty is an agreement between the government and the Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand. And if you want to know what are the rights of the Maori people here in New Zealand, and the treaty is the best way to go to, or to read, or to understand. The overview of my presentation would be, I will discuss about the background briefly of the treaty. And thank you for the PowerPoint, whoever you are, just follow what I say. Thank you so much, guys, for doing that. So the overview of my presentation in the second slide would be, I will discuss the background of the treaty, the challenges of the treaty, and the solution. I will also discuss what does the treaty mean, and of course, what would be the results or benefits of enforcing or honoring the treaty here in New Zealand. And if you have some questions, I will be happy to answer them at the end. Hopefully I can answer them. All right. The treaty concerns between the New Zealand government and the indigenous people of New Zealand, the Maori people. And let's have a look about who they are. So the Maori people are the indigenous people of New Zealand. They are the tangata whenua. They're the people of the land. And they came to New Zealand 1,000 years ago, I think in the 14th century. And they came via canoe or waka from Polynesia. And the treaty was signed in 1840. And at that time, Maori population was 97%. And the settlers, or the European, they came from Britain, so we call them Europeans / British. They were only 3% in terms of population. And of course, pre-colonization, Maori had absolute authority over their affairs. They were organized people. They had their ways of doing things. They were able or capable to manage their own affairs politically and military, economic, social, all aspects of their lives. So they were an organized society already prior to the coming of the British people. And now, or the post-treaty, after the treaty was signed, fast forward, population of Maori in New Zealand is now at 16%, and the settlers or the European, they are now at 74%. Like the effects of colonization is not always good. Maoris are disadvantaged, disparities in all aspects of life, would it be health, education. For example, in education, Maori has the lowest rate in educational attainment here. And in terms of justice system, over 50% of New Zealand's prisoners are Maori, although Maori only made up 16% of New Zealand population. And now let's discuss about the background of the treaty. So again, the treaty was signed between the government and Maori in 1840. And it was a binding agreement, and which means the government cannot run away from it. It's kind of like a wedding without a divorce or without annulment. So you can't just run from it. So it was an agreement being signed between the government and the Maori. And that was in Waitangi, New Zealand, up north. And that's why it's called Treaty of Waitangi, or Titiriti o Waitangi. That's the Maori or Te Reo term for that. And it has two different versions. It's only one document, but two interpretations, because there were two languages. The Maori signed the Maori version, and the settlers signed the English version. And that is the challenge that we will be talking tonight. And how do we resolve that challenge, or how did we resolve that challenge? And again, that's the only document, i.e. the treaty, where Maori rights are guaranteed. Because in New Zealand, there are many legislations, there are many laws and enactments of parliament, but a lot of these laws do not guarantee the rights of Maori people. It's specific to their cultural lens, it's specific to their customs, their ways of doing things, or their tradition. So, you know, it's not expressly, the rights of Maori are not expressly stated in many legislations or acts of parliament in New Zealand. So that's the only document where you can find what are really the rights of Maori, or how, you know, Maori can be themselves and live in accordance with their own ways of doing things, basically. So why did they sign the treaty? The next slide, please. Of course, when the British came to New Zealand, there were news back to England that the British were just buying land from Maori in exchange of blankets. So it was really cheap. And so can you imagine coming here and you can just buy the land really, really cheaply? So the governor here, they said, oh, we need to control that kind of thing. That cannot be done. Like, we need to have some sort of resolution, like how are we going to maintain it? So the way to do it is, and also secondly, a lot of settlers or Europeans, when they came here, they committed sexual crimes, or again, I said land bargaining in exchange for a blanket. So they wanted to protect the Maori people, and they also wanted to maintain peace and order, because there were actually some wars, not necessarily the big wars we're talking about, but there were actually some not good things that were happening at that time. So there were an agreement that, yeah, we want to make sure that there is fairness here. We want to make sure that the Maori were protected, and we want to make sure that we have peace and order. So for Maori, they signed the treaty with the belief that they will be looked after, but they will still maintain their cultural, social, economic, and political prosperity. Anyway, let's define what is the treaty. So for a lot of us, treaty is the founding document of New Zealand, because that is, the treaty will guide the relationship, how these two races, the Pakeha or the European and the Maori will live together. So it is in the document, it is the relationships, the framework of the relationships is found in the document. And of course, it is an exchange of promises between government and Maori. So what are the promises? So like the wedding vow, it is a reciprocal exchange of promise or undertaking. So the promise of the government to Maori is, Maori, you will retain your absolute authority, how to govern your ways of doing things. We will not touch you. You will have absolute authority. That's what we call Tino Ranga Tiratanga. And for Maori, they also promised to the government, okay, you can make laws, you can govern, but mainly in the understanding of Maori, you can govern your own people because they are lawless here. So we wanted you to govern your subjects here. So you can make laws, you can govern so that we can maintain peace and order. But at the same time, in exchange for that, we can still maintain our absolute authority. All right, and we consider it one of the sources of New Zealand Constitution. If you are aware, there are only 2 countries in the world that have no written constitution, and that's Israel and New Zealand. So if you ask me, what is the Constitution of New Zealand? We have many sources, and one of that is the treaty. And like in the Philippines, perhaps you have this code or civil code, but in New Zealand, you have to find them somewhere. It's not easy, but it's also nice because it's flexible. It's easy to change laws. All right, let's go to the challenges of New Zealand. Again, as I alluded, there are 2 different versions. So I just want to touch one, the one differing version. The Maori text in terms of the Article 2 of the treaty, again, the Maori understood in the Maori version that they will retain their authority in terms of their lands, their homes, their taonga or their treasure, and everything else. But for the Crown's version or the government's version, Article 2, there was not actually authority there. It was just said in English when it was translated, because it was translated really, really quickly. In English, it just said that the Maori will have the full, exclusive, and undisturbed possessions of their land, forests, and fisheries. So they didn't know anything about it. So anyway, so for Maori version, they will maintain that authority for New Zealand law. For the settlers, there was no authority there. So there's no lack of there's a lack of understanding. The treaty is never taught at school, and it's not surprising that a lot of New Zealanders have no understanding about it. They're ignorant, and the default reaction of the treaty is quite, they don't really get it. So for many years, the interpretation of the treaty was, it's just an agreement. We had to move on. It's not important. That was in pre-1980s. But in 1989, there was a breakthrough. There was this New Zealand Maori Council, and my boss is actually one of the lawyers that brought case to the High Court, and then testing the water, like what is really the status of the treaty. And to make the story short, it was a good story. The court said, we must recognize the treaty because the treaty is not a nullity. The treaty is a valid law, and it is part of New Zealand's fabric of New Zealand society, and it can no longer be ignored. And because of the 1989 case, there are hundreds of historical and contemporary breaches of the treaty. So going back in 1840, how the Crown behaved or how the government behaved, that they did not really honor the promise, they did not give Maori the authority, they did not protect the Maori and everything else. So there were thousands of breaches. So how did they solve that? So the solution is the government enacted the Treaty of Waitangi Act, 1975. And the way to interpret the treaty, because the treaty is really important, the way to interpret it is they create this specialist court, and it's called the Waitangi Tribunal. Can you go please to the next slide? And the Waitangi Tribunal is a specialist court in New Zealand who has a sole jurisdiction to interpret the treaty. So a lot of the members or the judges of the Waitangi Tribunal are Maori, or they're expert in Maori, and they are academics, and lots of, they need to be competent in understanding the treaty. So This Waitangi Tribunal is a court where a lot of the cases are heard. We have and all Maori in terms of breaches of the treaty, they can bring it here, and the court can hear and can actually. This is where I normally appear in my case, and we have the historical case, so that would be from 1840 to 1992, all the breaches of the government. That's what we bring to the court, and from 1992 up to now, that's what we call the contemporary breaches of the treaty, because the actions of the government still breach the treaty. For example, one of the cases that I run is about the children, or the Orang Tamariki. 70% of Orang Tamariki, or 70% of children that are taken by the state or by the government are Maori children, and they don't. And the reason for that is because the government's policies are racist, and it's fundamentally racist. It's like a Titanic that is so huge that it cannot be saved because the structure is just so European. It doesn't work for Maori. They did not consult the Maori. They did not listen to the Maori. So the report or the result of this case that I'm working on will be released in the next 2 weeks. I'm really excited about that. So that's just one of the example. Also the health. I'm also running a case about the health. 70% of Maori are disadvantaged when it comes to their health. And of course, women, a lot of Maori women are being displaced because of the government's policies, also the water. So these are all the cases that I will be running as well. And these are all the contemporary cases. Okay, how am I doing with time? Is that all good? Or we're good with time?
Yes, attorney. So
how many more hours? More hours, more? How many minutes?
Attorney.
Sorry?
5 minutes left.
Okay, 5 minutes left. Okay, let's just pass this forward. Let me know when the time is up. So what the treaty means. So let's go back to because the treaty is now like recognized, and then there were cases how to interpret it. So this is actually what the treaty means. And because of this, the government must adhere to it. Otherwise, if the government does not adhere to this principles of the treaty, then the breaches or the cases will just continue to pile up, and it's so expensive for the taxpayer, because every time we go to court for just one hearing in the Waitangi Tribunal, it costs us $30,000, and it is actually the taxpayers' money that we spend. So there is a fiscal responsibility there that if we want to get it right, we better get it right, and the government must do these things. So anyway, these are the principles of the treaty. So the government has a right to make laws and govern in the nation of New Zealand, but it is not an absolute authority. They can only govern so far as it protects the Maori. But if it is not protecting the Maori anymore, it can be a breach. So the government's governance is not unfettered. It's not absolute. It must be balanced by the guarantee of Maori's absolute authority to manage their own affairs. So it's not supreme. The next one is good governance. It's very self-explanatory, but what I would like to add is the government should be accountable for its actions in relation to Maori. According to the Waitangi Tribunal or the court, the government must be subject to independent scrutiny, and that is the parliament and the court, which has the legal process. So yeah, so the government is really careful how they do it. And the third one is what we call Tino Rangatiratanga, or self-government and autonomy. So that's why I was talking about that. It is really important to understand that the Maori retain the right to self-determination, autonomy, and management of all their affairs. So if you take away their children, that is not self-government. You are interfering the lives of Maori. If you take away their health, if you take away their housing, if you leave them homeless because you don't provide housing for them, that is not autonomy. That is not self-government, because self-government also involves provision. It's not just enough to say, oh, you can do it. It's also important to enable them to do it, enabling the Maori to do it. So that's what it means, Tino Rangatiratanga, or self-governed or autonomy. Anyway, partnership is the next one. Partnership meaning, just like marriage, as I said before, just there is an ongoing dialogue. For example, the case that we're running at the moment is who owns the water in New Zealand, because for Maori, water is really important for them. Who owns the water? So the government cannot just legislate the law without consulting the Maori. There has to be an ongoing dialogue. What does it mean for Maori, and what does it mean for the whole of population of New Zealand? So next week I will be in Auckland and I will be in Rotorua to hear the voices of the Maori, their view of reforming the resource management. So when there is a new law and it affects the Maori, then we need to consult them. It's an ongoing dialogue. That's what it means, partnership. The fifth one, please. The fifth one is active protection. So the government must actively protect Maori, not just physically, but also the treasures that are important to Maori, like the airwaves, the radio airwaves. They can't just sold it to foreigners. They can't just sell it to China. They have to actually say, oh, we can't just sell it. We can't just sell it, We need to consult the Maori because these are important to them, because according to Article 2 of the treaty, airwaves is a taonga. All right, options. So options, next slide, please. Maori have the right, is there options? Is it equity? Okay, equity. Okay, just go to number 5. So option meaning like if Maori would say, oh, we want to be part of this government, then that's fine. And if Maori doesn't want to be part of the government, then I think it's important for New Zealanders to consider that, for example, caring for their children. Do they want a separate institution to care for their children? Then we need to listen to it. Equity, the Crown must act fairly as Maori, between Maori and settlers. So meaning it cannot just use that power, at the expense of Maori. It cannot just build lots and lots of houses, then it pollutes the water that is really important for Maori. So there is that balance. Okay, next is equal treatment. The Crown must treat all Maori groups equally. So what does it mean? For example, when we go back to partnership, I want to partner with one particular group of Maori. So meaning it's not just enough to have that amazing discretion. You need to have that equal opportunity for all Maori to engage in the process. And the last one, which is really important, is redress. If the government is liable, if they breach the treaty, then the law secures that they are liable to compensate to Maori. And at this stage, the government has given the Maori 1 billion. All right. So the status of the treaty now, what is the status of the treaty now? Because of the movement here in New Zealand, the Maori text is given weight. Sovereignty was not ceded by Maori, meaning Maori can retain that sovereignty. The government gained governance, which was primarily the right to govern, just like what I said. And Maori and the government were to be equals. So it's not just enough to say, oh, you do that, you do that, you do that. Let's have that conversation with Maori. What do you want? Rather than the government knowing what it wants from Maori. Of course, let's go to the results. So when we enforce the treaty, so this is what happened. This is just one of the few examples, but there are many that are happening now because the government is really open to it, right? And we are quite revolutionary and radical in New Zealand because we don't have a written constitution. We can just make our own laws like that. It's amazing. You should move here, guys. Anyway, so Maori education, there are Maori preschools, Maori schools, and Maori universities. In terms of language, Te Reo Maori became a national language in 1989, and it's free to learn. There is really money. I'm doing it now. It's free. And a political party, before Maori were not allowed to vote before, but now Maori has a political party and 29 Maori members of parliament. That's 24% compared to 16% of New Zealand population. And again, there is a specialist court, the Waitangi Tribunal, and the legal aid. What does it mean, legal aid? For them to actually bring the case to New Zealand, to Waitangi Tribunal, the government will pay for them. They don't have to pay a single cent because there is a legal aid, and that's the law. Okay, broadcasting organizations, there's Maori TV, there is Maori television, there's Maori radio, and urban social and economic authorities. So there is housing authorities, there's health authorities, etc., you name it. Businesses, more than 1 billion in assets owned by Maori. And before, compared it before honoring the treaty before 1989. And coming to conclusion, let's go to conclusion, the last slide. It's not perfect. But if we get it right, we really have the chance in New Zealand to get it right. And I think now is the best time to get it right. Otherwise, if the government does not listen, we have another 200 years of wasted money. So New Zealand is best placed to honor Indigenous rights because of the treaty. And I think it depends on the openness of the government. And I'm proud to say that New Zealand's government is really open about it. And it's not, there is no transformation yet. I would not say there is transformation, but I think we are better. So to truly achieve transformation, there is a need for a new system that is consistent with the treaty. And what do I mean by it? I would like all our laws to be treaty consistent, because a lot of our laws are not yet treaty consistent. And when we do that, then that is better. And that's me. And thank you for having me, guys. And if you have any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Attorney Cajes. Your discussion help us understand more about the culture of the indigenous people of the New Zealand. This is an enlightenment to all present here today to be familiar on what are the promises being implemented within the indigenous people there in New Zealand. At this juncture, we're going to proceed to our open forum. Students, you can either raise your hands or send your questions through our chat box.
All right, I believe we already have questions here in the chat box. Let me just read it for you. All right. For the first question, this question, I believe this is for Attorney Jesil. How can the international community help protect indigenous people's rights without internal interference?
Can you repeat that? I can't hear it because there's something like coming in and out. This stuff.
Okay, sure, Attorney. All right.
Sorry, I think I'm getting older now.
No
I can't
worries.
hear you guys.
Okay. So how can the international community help preserve and protect indigenous people's rights without internal interference?
When you say internal interference, did you mean domestic affairs? Is that what you mean?
I believe this question came from.
All right, thank you for the question. I think I'm not really an expert of international law. What I can say is I will take your question as internal, I guess internal interference would be the domestic affairs, i.e. the government of the country. Is that what you mean? Or the executive, whatever you call it in the country. So the international community, I think joining the treaty, the UN treaty of the indigenous people would be a good start, because if there is that international check, then there is that other arena for the indigenous people to bring their case. So I think when it's strengthened internationally, when it's weak domestically but it's strengthened internationally, then there is an ally about that. But again, I must say I'm not an expert of international law. But thank you for the question.
All right, thank you, Attorney. I think we still have a question for you. What could be a sustainable and concrete solution to make sure that indigenous people are protected and their culture being preserved? Again, what could be a sustainable and concrete solution to make sure that indigenous people are protected and their culture is being preserved?
Yes, I think New Zealand is an example of that. I think we are not perfect yet. We haven't gotten to that stage yet. But I think what we do in New Zealand, I think, is having that, putting the status of the indigenous people at the forefront of our policies, at the forefront of our lawmaking, at the forefront of our practices. So it's not just enough to legislate laws, but actually how do this law look like in practice? So it's important, really. It is a multi-layered solution, but in terms of sustainability, we are talking about making it as part of the society, becoming the fabric of what we do in everything. So it could be like, for example, it could be in terms of lawmaking, we must elect parliamentarians that are for it. And secondly, in terms of policy, that involves organizations and leaders that have that awareness of what it means, indigenous rights, in terms of practicalities that requires education. So I think it is really a task for everyone, and that begins by having this conversation, being open about it, and having that advocacy, and that it's okay to do that. So for the New Zealand, the breakthrough, from 1840, and then the breakthrough just started in 1989, and that breakthrough happened in a legal proceeding. Because of that, it started that conversation, and now it's getting bigger and stronger. So I guess what I would say is having that awareness first, and taking action of that awareness would be one of the things that we can do. But I would like to see the Treaty of Waitangi in New Zealand to have it really to be sustainable, because we don't know who's going to be the next elected MPs or prime minister, to be entrenched in our law, to be entrenched in our constitution, so that there is no way out.
All right, thank you, Attorney, for answering these questions. Nandebs, please. Yes.
Good evening, our speakers. This question is for Sir Cardenas. Sir, the question is, do you think gun control can be abused, since only law-abiding citizens can follow them, but criminals will ignore it?
Hello. Hi. All right. Thank you for the question. It's a valid question and a valid argument. So the law can definitely be abused. That's a reality in every regulation that we have. Although in its essence, a law should be able to prevent abuse of it, no? And there should be mechanisms in place for the prevention of abuse of that law. Now, that's referring to abuse of the law. When we talk about gun control, and when we talk about gun control, and in terms of it being the law not being able to regulate it, or rather the law not being sufficient enough to regulate that activity, there might be instances in several jurisdictions that the law is not really doing its job. In such cases, diversion or any unscrupulous activities might be possible. So, as much as possible, the law in its form should be able to have mechanisms of proper enforcement. So every law should have proper enforcement mechanisms. In terms of the SDMA, there's an enforcement part of that law also. So as I mentioned earlier about requiring a TCP, technology control plan for transfers of technology. So a company importing weapon systems or strategic goods, exporting also, not having a TCP is subject for an administrative or criminal violation already. So that's one enforcement mechanism of the law. But actually, it's very difficult to regulate this unscrupulous activities, because apart from us regulators being able to develop our own mechanisms, they're also developing their own mechanisms to divert those weapons. No? So as I've mentioned earlier, Pakistan has developed its weapon systems, and it's very new. The world didn't expect that to happen. So it happened, and now Pakistan has its nuclear capability. It's nuclear capable. Also, there are instances that even with the strongest regulations that we have, still weapons are diverted. some weapons of the Philippines, actually firearms, are being used by terrorist groups. When they have an encounters with the military, they pick up the weapons and they use it on as their own. That some realistic instances. No? So it's really difficult to say that we have a foolproof regulation, but as much as possible, we develop a regulation that could cover those gaps. And if gaps are not yet covered in the existing regulation, we amend and amend. Sometimes the gap doesn't occur in the regulation itself, but rather in the implementation. So as mentioned by Attorney Jesil earlier, a regulation should we cannot expect a regulation to be foolproof, but the implementation should also be there. No, it should be a proper implementation also. That should come hand in hand. So sometimes the regulation's problem is in the implementation. That's where diversion occurs in the implementation problem. So sadly, even some regulators, not necessarily Philippines, but also in other jurisdictions, are involved in these activities. You have to understand that these activities involve a lot of agencies, a lot of levels. So before it entering, for example, in the Philippines, before it entering our country, it passes to a lot of channels. So it should pass customs. For military weapons, some are regulated by PNP under Firearms and Explosives Office. Some big weapons are regulated by our office also. So for missiles and all, regulated by the Philippines, by the Strategic Trade Management Office. So there are different levels, and after that, also finance is approving such imports. Ayun. So we cannot say we can have a foolproof regulation and implementation, but as much as possible, we should be doing our part as regulators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Cardenas. We have another question, and it has one follow-up question. The question is, which countries do the Philippines import our arms from? And the follow-up question is, how does that impact the relations we have with the said countries?
All right, thank you again for the follow-up question. I cannot say definite which countries we are importing from. I can only speak from experience. As for the weapons that are being imported or firearms being imported by PNP, I don't have any. I cannot share the data. But as for my experience, some countries, not all, include Israel and the US. Those are the countries that entered my table for approval. Sorry, for recommendation. And the impact would be, of course, we have before the Philippines would be able to import such weapons from those countries, we should have a very good relation with them. No? So having good relations to them would only enable the country for negotiations, and good negotiations would result to such weapons being imported to the country. Ayun. What's the third question? Sorry, I missed it. There was a third question, right?
Wait lang. Wait lang po.
It's okay.
The follow-up question po is, how does that impact the relations we have with the said countries?
Mm-hmm. Then that was the second question. There was a third one. Was it? Tama ba or wala na?
No more po for you.
No
sir.
more.
Thank you
Okay,
po.
sige. So yun. Just that those countries so far has entered my table for recommendation. But regardless, it's very good actually that country is developing its weapon systems. And regardless if we're importing brand new or used or even spare parts, it's a good development for the country because we're developing our military. Not necessarily for it to be used, but just in case we would need it someday. So those were the countries. I might be able to get a more extensive list, but I cannot share it as of this moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sir Christian. Attorney, I think I still have few questions for you. Okay, so
Sorry, I think I was muted or I was mute.
all right, it's okay. Attorney, but for question number one, what can we do to strengthen the influence of the Maori people? Should I continue the number 2, 3, and 4, Attorney? I think it's just a few questions.
Let's just do it one by one.
All right,
Thank you,
All right.
Mary Divine. What can we do to strengthen the influence of the Maori people? Oh, definitely. There's so much to do, and if you are not fighting for them in the legal arena, learn about them. You know, perhaps you can even say "Kia ora" or like learn a little bit about their language, and some practicalities. As a student, you may be interested in actually learning about their culture, about who they are, being open about them. And also like even in the workplace, just using some Maori or incorporating Maori ways of doing things would be good, would be a good start. So I think here in New Zealand, in terms of the macro level, the media has so much role to play. And one of the things that we do before the hearing really is feed what's going on, like, hey, there's a Maori case coming up, so the media would come to our hearing, and I think that is really a good way to do it. But yes, from non-Maori people, I think being accepting and learning more about them would be a good start to help that influence, because the more the better.
All right, thank you, Attorney. So are they considered citizens of NZ?
Yes, they are, because they are the tangata whenua. They came first, so they are called the people of the land. So interpreting it in our language, basically they own the land. They are from the land, so they are the citizens of New Zealand.
For the third question, Attorney, how do the British people express equal treatment towards them if racism is prevalent?
It is a question. It is a, it has almost the same. It's kind of like there is a contradiction there, but the more you actually give equal treatment, the racism will reduce. But racism is still there, but the word prevalent probably not necessarily the people, but it is the system that is racist. So no matter how good the people are, but if the structure of the New Zealand society is racist, like the Minister for Children, it will never work. So I guess the people is the solution. The problem is the system. So what are you gonna do? So you gather these two people, sit together, and work out the solution. And that's what we call the open dialogue or partnership. And the best way to do it is basically incorporating the Maori system to the existing system that we have. And we need to ask the Maori people, does your system work alongside the current system, or do we create a new system to reduce that racism so that we can fulfill what is in the treaty? So that's why it's really important to have that open dialogue partnership, and that's part of good governance, really, and that's part of options, that's part of equity, and that's part of all those principles that I was talking about. So the people is not the problem, it is the structure, because the structure was created by the British, And regardless of how much you do, there's so much you can only do because it's too big to stop. Again, it's like Titanic. It's too big to stop. It cannot be saved. Some of the systems, it's too big that the best way to do it is to create a new one.
All right, thank you, Attorney. So before we will go to the clarification for questions for Attorney for Ambassador Gary, the last question for you, Attorney, is how can the Maori advance as a community if they are given limited resources due to racism?
That's right. That's a really good question. How can the Maori advance as a community if they're given limited resources due to racism? But I also want to tell you one important thing. You know, the resources that the government can only control is money. But in terms of any other resources, the knowledge, how to interpret the different areas of the environment, Maori has so much resources that we don't know about. They have so much capacity. So the only resource that the government controls is really the money, and that's an easy fix. They just give the money, you know. So Maori people know how to run their own school. Maori people know how to run their own television. Maori people know how to run their thousands of acres of land. They know how to do that. They all have the knowledge how to do that. But if the government withholds that one important resource, the money, then they can't do that. So what is really important is enabling our Maori community. And one of that enabling means is transfer that resources, transfer that money. So having that devolution of resource to Maori by trusting them that they can actually take care of their own, but at the same time, you must resource them, you must give them money, and that is the duty of active protection. That is Article 2 of the treaty, that the government must actively protect the Maori. Because if you don't give them the money, even if they have all the knowledge, they can't do anything. They can't build their houses, they can't build their own hospitals, they can't do that. So really, it's about enabling the Maori community, devolution of resources, devolution of that power. Stop being so controlling, you know, and they're aware of that because the court tells them all the time.
All right, thank you very much, Attorney. So let's proceed to clarification for questions for Gary. Okay, and Debs, please, thank you.
Okay.
All the questions for Ambassador Domingo are already answered in the chat box. So if you have any more questions, you can just message us again in the chat box and we're going to read it for you.
To clarify some points or generalize it, all the questions for the delegates to be enlightened. Ambassador Gary, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Did you want, sorry, to clarify, you wanted me to address the questions or we're winding up or what? Sorry.
You'd like to generalize the questions given in the chat box.
Oh, okay. First one, okay. I'd like to also underscore where I'm very honored to have my good friend, Attorney Jesil, joining us. She is one of our pioneer volunteer ambassadors, and her work is very important because really, I've been ambassador in New Zealand, and this is perhaps the best country for welcoming migrants. Filipinos are doing so fantastically well here. And I think if we had taken the Waitangi approach to how to deal with the Bangsamoro, the Lumad, the Cordillerans, we would have been a lot better off. So it was a great opportunity to share with you through Jesil. Of course, Christian, my wingman since 2014 in the Diplomatic League. Okay, and I'm so glad to see he's becoming truly a security sector diplomat. Now, I guess the general questions I have is one is preparing, how to prepare for the Foreign Service exam. And I really have to say that it's because it's not a board exam, it's not something you really cram for. We're not testing your knowledge of international law, consular regulations. We want to see if you have a good working knowledge of the world, you know the Philippines. So yeah, yes, there is an advantage if you're an IR, foreign service major, but it's not an absolute requirement. So to prepare, and somebody asked me, how long should you take to prepare? Well, actually, all your life. No, I mean, really, what are the things that you need to prepare for? One, again, if you're a Filipino, if you've been really listening and taking your lesson seriously on Philippine history, conditions, you're following current news, that's already a good and necessary preparation. You should read, not just watch videos, you should read articles daily of what's going on in the Philippines, what's going on in the world. But that's the passive present preparation. You need to write. And the best format to write are newspaper articles or law school exam questions. So the format of an article and the format of how you answer a law school exam are very good ways to answer the questions in a Foreign Service examination. And get copies of past Foreign Service officer exam. You can get it inscribed, I think. And maybe, I think, yeah, you have great resources at USA. I think you do have some teachers, professors who have exposure. I'm glad to see, Ambassador Norman Garibay, he could also be a great resource. But otherwise, please join us in the Diplomatic League, where we do, and we'll do more of it now, mentoring and advice on preparing for a diplomatic career. Somebody mentioned specifically about working in consular. You'll get about visas and passport, you'll be trained in consular, but you should have good office management skills, how to use, Word, Excel, how to file. It doesn't hurt to know how to make good coffee for your boss. Use how to use a copier, but still, a lot of those are on-the-job skills. What you should really think about is preparing for a full diplomatic career through the Foreign Service exam. Now, maybe in another session, I can talk about how to join other international organizations like the United Nations, like ASEAN. I'd be happy to do that for you guys. The other questions were about, let's see. The Diplomatic League. You can join as an individual. It's nice if your org, like the Junior Diplomatic Corps, would join as a group, but you can join as an individual. You go through an orientation, you get some project assignments. Basta email me, ambagarydomingo, one word, at gmail.com. And we'd like to work with the JDC of USA and our other friends here. In fact, we're working closely with our friends from even in New Jersey, and I hope you guys are still around. So yeah, this is just the beginning. So Christian and Jesil will be in the team to help you on your journey to in the Diplomatic League and to become VAMBA. Now, technically, VAMBA is for adults, so university age above. Yamba is for high school and below. Bakit VAMBA or Yamba? Kasi meron tayong theme song. Christian, what's our theme song?
I don't want to sing, sir.
Okay. Jesil, you remember our theme song?
Atty. Jesil perhaps can sing.
I'll give it to Christian.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Para bailar la bamba. Cornelia.
That's why he
Somebody
needs to
asked me
wing.
also, what else do you need to know? You have to know how to do karaoke. Filipino diplomats are expected to sing. Or at least kung ayaw mong kumanta, ayaw mong mag-TikTok, at least, dance. So one of our trademarks, we're very brilliant people, but we're the most fun and the most sociable people. We have to leverage that. So there's that expectation. Yun. So karaoke is a good, well, maybe not for the FSO exam, but for the long-term career. That's basically it, I guess. And again, you have my email, or you have the JDC who you can work with. You have Christian. I'm glad you met Attorney Jesil for advice on Waitangi and how it is in living in New Zealand. And one other very important thing, I'm very proud that Jesil is among those who really are looking to really take leadership in New Zealand. So one other wonderful thing about New Zealand, it has been the only country in recent time where we had a full Filipino-born or full-blooded Filipino who got in the Congress or the Parliament of New Zealand. The only other countries, we've never had a full-blooded or Filipino-born Filipino in the US Congress. The only other countries were Canada and South Korea. But so we'd also like to help develop globally Filipino and overseas Filipinos to become to rise in the societies that they've settled in. Ano pa? Okay, that's it for me for now, I guess. I think time is running, so maybe MCs, let's maybe go.
All right, thank you very much for our speakers. All right, so thank you as well, delegates, for sending your questions. And if there are more questions, you can send them in the chat box and we'll compile them. We will send your questions to our respective speakers and send them back to you with your certificate. Thank you very much. Now, I just wanted to pitch in. Prince Philip, husband of Queen Elizabeth and a leading figure in the British royal family for almost 7 decades, has died, aged 99, Buckingham Palace said on Friday, April 9. To the Duke of Edinburgh, as he was officially known, had been by his wife's side throughout her 69-year reign, the longest in British history. The Duke of Edinburgh had taken up more than 22,000 solo engagements, 637 overseas visits, delivered an estimated 5,493 speeches, and worked as a patron to almost 800 organizations. Now let us keep a moment of silence, please, for his death. All right, then Debs, you may have the floor. Thank you very much.
At this point, we're going to present our certificate to our respective speakers. Diplomatic League Junior and Junior Diplomats Corps Diplomatic League Conference Iloilo 2021 awards this certificate of recognition to His Excellency Ambassador Jesus S. Domingo for sharing his valuable knowledge as a guest speaker during the Diplomatic League Conference 2021, given this 9th day of April 2021, Iloilo City.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The certificate of recognition given to Mr. Christian Mark Cardenas for sharing his valuable knowledge as a guest speaker during the Diplomatic League Conference 2021, given this 9th day of April 2021, Iloilo City.
Thank you.
Our last certificate to be awarded, the certificate of recognition to Atty. Jesil Cajes for sharing her valuable knowledge as a guest speaker during the Diplomatic League Conference 2021, given this 9th day of April 2021, Iloilo City. Honorable guests, your certificates will be sent through your emails.
Thank you.
At this point, we're going to have our photo op session. Can I request everyone to please open their camera and give our respective speakers a very big smile. Let's open the camera.
Maybe,
Lights, please.
maybe, thank you very much, Nailagan. Okay, so everyone, give your best smile in 3, 2, 1, smile. All right, for the next batch, so since we have 4 slides, all right. 1, 2, 3, smile. All right, for the next one. 1, 2, 3, smile. Smile. I can see your beautiful faces, everyone. All right. Okay, thank you very much. Nandev, all right.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending for tonight's talk with our respective speakers. And that includes the first part of our training, of our conference, rather. Now let us proceed to our training. With your presentation, please.
All right, that concludes our first part of our conference of our training and workshop, everyone. See you in our second day. And enjoy your evening, everyone. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, guys. I'll see you again. Kaki Tiano.
Delegates, please stay for a moment because we're going to proceed to our training. Proceed to our training. Proceed to our training. Proceed to our training. Proceed to our training.
Delegates, I apologize. So can you just stay for a while? Let's proceed to our training. Thank you very much. Once again, delegates, please stay for we are about to proceed to our training. Thank you very much.
To begin our training popper, let us call on Mr. Christian Cardenas.
All right, thank you, Debs. I thought we're convening. We're suspending the session. Huh? Siguro we could have a 5-minute break before moving on to the next part of the program. Since you already announced, Mary already announced that we would be suspending. Siguro 5 minutes break na lang yung concession of the organizers before proceeding to the training.
Alright, so we will have our break for this time. Sorry for earlier. This time you may drink your water, eat your snacks, or just relax and enjoy this training, everyone.